influences without losing its own identity. But the biggest foreign influence had yet to arrive. It originated not in Rome, but in the Holy Lands of Jerusalem, and it would contribute to the fall of the empire in Britain. Having forced themselves on Britain, the Romans abandoned this insignificant island to deal with more pressing problems at home. However, I don't believe this was the case. This vast lead tank has been restored to its original state. But when I first saw it, I was crammed at the bottom of a Roman well, and the tank lay there like a crumpled milk carton. I remember thinking, why on earth didn't they melt it down and reuse this valuable lead? Why dispose of it in this deliberate fashion? What was so special about this tank? The tank is decorated with a symbol which combines the Greek letters Chi and Rho, which is a sign of very early Christian worship. This is Constantine the Great. Near this spot in July 306, he was made Emperor of Rome. He later went on to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. It was a time of immense political change that foreshadowed the ultimate collapse of the Roman Empire in the West. By encouraging Christianity in Britain, Constantine gave his subjects something that would become more powerful than Rome itself. Constantine's conversion came towards the end of the Roman occupation of Britain, by which time the structure of society had begun to change.
During the late 3rd century and on into the 4th, the super rich stopped spending their money on public buildings for the benefit of the population in general. They spent it on themselves. The big money moves out of the towns. It's a pattern we've seen in our own time. Wealthy people tend to take their money out to their country estates. The great villas were just scattered throughout southern Britain. There we have these people right out on the fringe of the Roman world, aping a classical world from hundreds of years ago. These people were sticking references to classical mythology and classical literature on the floors in their houses.
These mosaics hold a key to the way in which beliefs in Britain changed. Chedworth Villa in Gloucestershire was one of the richest of these country houses. Phil Bethel showed me around.
This was one of probably the top 10 richest, most opulent houses in the whole of Britain in the 4th century. All along the length of this corridor, there would have been a continuous mosaic floor, nearly 80 metres long. So they had everything that money at that time could buy. Mosaics in every room, underfloor heating systems, 2 bathhouses, their very own in-house water shrine. This whole thing was designed to show you I'm rich and I'm powerful. So this was actually a little temple, and here it was actually part of their daily religion where they'd worship in time-honoured fashion, going back to the Celtic origins of the Romano-British religion, but they'd worship the spirit of the spring. They seem to have almost recreated a bit of their earlier cultural history. The idea that this was a Roman from Rome living here seems a bit unlikely. The Roman Empire, it was a bit like a sort of a franchise. You know, they opened a branch of Rome out here in Britain, and the people who actually did the day-to-day governing and running of the country were by and large natives. It would, in this case, would have been native Britons, but from the families that were probably already important before the Romans came. It seems in Gloucestershire there wasn't a big conquest here. The local tribe, the Dobunni, seemed to play along with the Romans when they invaded. But that maybe why it became a very wealthy area. Rich, powerful people who lived here already took advantage of that new system to increase their wealth.
Some of the mosaics that covered the floor of Chedworth Villa have been destroyed. But many British mosaics have been preserved in architectural drawings. From a society who didn't leave many written records, these mosaics are a unique insight into the complex minds of the Romano Brits and the beliefs that changed their world. Some of these mosaics contain a strange mixture of Christian and pagan symbols, which have long been dismissed as clumsy mistakes. But in actual fact, these images are connected to the mystery of a lead tank.
I think that we ought to look at mosaic pavements in much the same way one would look at stained glass windows in churches. When you go to Chartres and look at the glorious stained glass windows in a Gothic church, each image up there says something. We have to see this as being a literate society, a learned society, elite members of society with quite a lot of time on their hands, who were interested in reading the classics and the literature, and they are trying to make sense of the world they live in.
At Lullingston Roman Villa, the discovery of a converted chapel was evidence that Christianity had been practiced here. Within the mosaics, Dominic Perring has found a sign that the people here were dealing in a very unusual Christian cult called Gnosticism.
4th century is a period of vigorous intellectual ferment. And whereas today we have a strong idea about science as leading us forward, then it was very clearly philosophy. People were trying to escape the mortal condition, this prison of our world. To escape, it was about knowing the secrets. It was about knowing how to move into a higher plane of existence. And knowledge was very much part of that. Knowledge of the images, knowledge of mythology, knowledge of philosophy, knowledge of Christ, but also secret knowledges.
Hidden in the mosaics, Dominic has found Gnostic images which blend classical myths with the Christian ideas about immortality. This strange fusion of beliefs was at the heart of a Gnostic cult. It may have become a symbol of Romano-British culture.
Bellerophon is slaying a monster. He's riding winged Pegasus. The message here is both good slaying evil, but also the attempt to reach life immortal. It certainly was a set of beliefs which lent itself to urban, aristocratic, elite society and villa society. These were people who were able to engage in these arcane discussions, these philosophical debates.
Such independent thinking could not be tolerated by the empire, and in 380 the emperor denounced Gnosticism as heresy.
The emperor establishes edicts against heresies, and you're allowed to exile people, confiscate their lands and whatever. How does one stop heretics being heretics? Well, stop them baptizing. If a bishop can't baptize a flock, you don't increase the size of the flock. So destruction of baptismal fonts is one way of doing it. We've got archaeological evidence of damaged lead tanks, some of which quite clearly were used for baptism, which are being cut into pieces and thrown down wells.
The crumpled baptism tank that I had seen was just one of many Christian items which had been deliberately destroyed or buried in this area.
We have church plate, baptismal spoons, the chalice used in the Eucharist, being buried in some of these silver hoards. People are decommissioning these items.
Whoever buried this collection of precious silver must have felt anger and resentment, because their property, their beliefs, their very identity were under attack. By the time this treasure was buried, Rome had lost the hearts and minds of the native Britons. Having invited the Romans in, absorbed and digested the rich and various influences of a classical world, Britain turned its back on Rome and looked to an independent future. The end of Roman administration was a new beginning for the people of Britain. 3.5 centuries after the Romans destroyed it, the magnificent hill fort of South Cadbury was reoccupied. It has long been imagined that the figure who led this resurgence was King Arthur.
Arthur is a kind of product of different generations and how they see themselves. Arthur was created largely by medieval romantic historians who wanted to create a kind of pseudo-chronology of events after the Roman invasion. And the trouble is it's loosely threaded together with pieces of genuine evidence. And it depends on how literally you choose to take bits of that. I rather suspect that Arthur is a kind of metaphor, a symbol for the sort of petty tribal chieftain who would have taken over power in a region after the Roman power collapsed in Britain. A man who could hold his people together.
This valiant king embodies a brave new world in which the descendants of Roman Britain began to build an independent future. And yet for centuries we have shrouded this exciting time under a veil of mystery and labelled it the Dark Ages. Next week we will discover that Arthur's Britain was in fact a time of creativity and progress, in which nothing less than the future identity of this country was forged.
So that's next week at the same time. And the book Britain AD by Francis Pryor is available at £20. To order your copy, call 0870 123 4344 or hit channel4.com/shop. Next tonight, Jack's very, very close to the edge in a chilling case, without a trace on the way.